was just delighted when Mary called me a few months ago to come and talk with you. Like Jane said, I have a consulting company and speaking company, and my whole focus is on diversity and inclusion. I talk about white privilege, gender, anti-racism, many of the things. Belonging is really my main concept. And I am delighted to talk to you today about gender. I have been experiencing being perceived as different for about 20 years. When I was a city attorney for San Diego, for example, I was wearing skirts and skirt suits and pearls and makeup and nylons as I was representing the people of the state of California. And I will share that even then, people would think I was a man and say, "Hello, sir, can I help you, sir?" And so I've always been sort of perplexed by what that means. And I think that sometimes it's a size issue. I'm about 5'10", and I've got swimmer shoulders and things like that. But it is very interesting. And so I've developed an interest in gender a long time ago. And I'm really happy to talk with you about today. The feeling, I think, is that there are, at least this is what my parents think and my colleagues, well, there's just new genders every day. How on earth do we keep up? And I'm here to tell you that, one, that's not really true, and two, it's easy to keep up. So hopefully I can help you to feel more comfortable and help you to know that it's okay if you don't know all of the words that people are using. And I'll just give you some history first. Does that sound all right? I like to call this Just How Many Genders Are There? Because as I said, I think a lot of people feel like this is an area that's exploding. But before I do that, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I like to start with some pictures so people feel like you have a little insight into me. So first you have my wife. My wife is a Scottish woman from Scotland here on a green card. And so she has a fantastic Scottish accent and thinks I am loud and rude, but still decided to marry me anyway. So that's a relief. Next, we have my two very serious children. This is a couple years ago. Now they are 17 and 13. Um, Following that, we have my dog, who is this amazing mutt, German Shepherd looking thing. And my wife loves to dress him up in costumes, and he's very tolerant of that. So I do some volunteer DJing, or at least I used to, as often as possible, moonlight in that way. This is the American Cancer Society. I've been helping for a couple of years down in the corner there. I am a huge Star Wars fan, and I always like to share this because I don't want you to think we're going to be too serious, especially because here, if you can see in this picture, I'm actually crying. I have tears running down my face, and that is very embarrassing, but it is because I had never met a Chewbacca before, and he's my favorite, and that's actually the best picture we could get as far as me not crying. So, yeah. Okay, then I share this last picture. This is me in the hospital, which is something that happens to me quite frequently. I was very touched, Melissa, by what Melissa shared. I have had 18 different surgeries by now in my relatively young life. I think I'm 51. And I share that as just as a reminder that you don't know what people are dealing with, right? When you see them. When you see me, you wouldn't know that I am disabled and that I struggle with these things. So, all right. So the first thing is, I think, the best thing. There is no single authority on gender, and it doesn't matter, right? So that, if you kind of let that sink in, that I think is very reassuring. Nobody knows everything there is to know about gender. So it's okay if you don't know everything there is to know about gender. And let me tell you why it doesn't really matter. But before we do that, I'm going to define a couple of terms for you. Sex assigned at birth, which sometimes is referred to as biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, the difference between transgender and cisgender, and then we're going to talk about sexual orientation. And these terms are sort of conflated most of the time into people saying lesbian and gay, or LGBTQ, or LGBTQ plus, or just gender and sexual orientation. But it's really important in my work to help you understand that there is quite a distinction between each of these terms. So this is a diagram you can find online. I made sure the credit is here. It's the Trans Student Educational Resource. And they created something called the gender unicorn. And I'm going to use this unicorn in the next few slides to talk about the difference between gender identity and gender expression and the sex assigned at birth. So you can see here, our little unicorn has 4 different drawings around the unicorn. There's a speech bubble above the unicorn's head. There's the sort of dots to the left of the unicorn. There's the hearts, and then there's the DNA near the unicorn's private area. So let's get into what each of these things mean. So when we talk about sex assigned at birth, what most of us would have heard and do hear is biological sex, right? Well, what's your real sex? What's your biology? That is disfavored, as you may be able to imagine, because for some of our friends, that doesn't fit them. And so when we talk about being inclusive and helping people to feel like they belong in the conversation, we use the term sex assigned at birth instead. And this is the gender/sex that was assigned to you when you were born, and biological sex is disfavored. Gender identity. So now we have the rainbow, right? This is what the unicorn is thinking. This is one's inner sense of one's own gender, which may or may not match the sex that you were assigned at birth. In other words, this is how you see yourself, how you feel that you are. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but each one of you right now knows exactly how you feel. Do you identify as a man? Do you identify as a woman? You identify as something in between or something else. But you have that feeling and you are in charge of that 100%. Right, gender expression. So when we say gender expression, we've got the sort of the outward facing green dots. What we're talking about here is what other people think your gender is. That's, what other people assign to you. Now, when Jane introduced me, she said, that the woman over there across the room, and I'm delighted that she identified me as a woman. As I shared right in the beginning, that doesn't happen consistently. A lot of people think I am a man because they perceive my gender to be male. They think, because of the way I look to the world, that I am a man. So that is gender expression for me. This is where this touches me. And this is sometimes referred to as how you present to the world, your dress and mannerisms. You can't see my entire outfit, but I am wearing a men's shirt and I have a men's bow tie on, although I don't know that bow ties are specific. But generally, men wear ties, right? So it's understandable that sometimes people think I am a man. That's gender expression. Now, transgender, I never want to assume that anybody knows these terms, so we just talk about them all. Identifying with a gender other than the sex you were assigned at birth. Trans, as in different, right? Across. Trans people, an interesting note is that trans people generally identify as male or female in those traditional gender roles. They do not identify as a different kind of gender, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. Cisgender. Now, cisgender is the correlative term to transgender. Cis meaning same. So this means that you identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. So when I introduce myself, I like to say, I'm Tristan Higgins. I'm a cisgender woman because I identify with the gender that I was assigned at birth, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. So gender expression is how you see me. Cisgender is my identity, how I feel. Can I just get a couple of nods? Are people with me? Okay, great. I want to make sure I'm not going too fast or too slow. All right, sexual orientation is totally different than these other things. And this is really an important concept. So we have the head, we have the outer expression, we have the private area and the reproductive organs, and now we have the heart, right? So who you are attracted to has nothing to do with your gender. And once you start to unpack those things, it allows for a lot more alternatives, a lot more options, as it were, than simply men who are attracted to men, women who are attracted to women, or men or women that are attracted to men or women. So when you realize that your gender has nothing to do with whom you are attracted to, it allows you to understand these concepts. All right. So I started by saying there's no authority, and then that's a good thing. And let's just explore that for a minute. If there was to be an authority, who would it be? Would we get the definitions of gender, the sort of finite definitions of gender from medicine? I mean, we know that medicine has evolved and hasn't seemed to understand a lot of concepts about people's bodies. Would it be science? And certainly, the AAUW, I know we were women here of education and science and medicine and understanding, but which science? And if we were to use religion, which certainly is a guiding principle for many people, which faith would we use? Different faiths perceive gender differently. If we were to use a government authority, the US government says gender is X, but that doesn't cover everyone, right? The US is only one country in more than 100 countries. 144? I'll have to look that up. Anthropologists, a lot of people want to look to anthropologists, but I can explain to you in a few minutes why going historical is not actually helpful in this sense. Because what point in time would we define that gender set, the slate of gender terms? Would we do it before the Christian era, before Common Era, as we now refer to it? Would we do it in the Common Era or the Christian era, or would it be now? I mean, things have evolved over thousands of years. At what point in time do we decide this is the definitive authority on gender? All right, so in the beginning, right, certainly the conversations I have with friends of mine, well, it just has always been male and female. In the beginning, in the garden, Adam and Eve, male and female. Okay, well, let's talk about that. What we have here is a stone tablet from the second millennium from Mesopotamia. And in this tablet, you have to trust me because I don't have the translation handy, the goddess Ninmah is shared to be fashioning a person with no male organ and no female organ. And this tablet dates to 2000, somewhere between 2000 and 1001 before Common Era or before Christian Era, depending on how you choose to refer to the dates. So as early as 2000 years before our modern history, we have male, female, and neither. So right before the beginning, we have more than two options. It just gets more complicated from there. In the beginning still, let's go a little bit more recent, from 385 to 380 BCE, we have what Plato terms as a third sex. So in Plato's Symposium, Aristophanes tells a story of creation in which, and I'll read the quote, "Original human nature includes a third sex. That sex was a distinct kind with a bodily shape and a name of its own, constituted by the union of the male and the female." And Plato, via his character Aristophanes, uses the word androgynous to describe third sex. I believe this is the first use of that word that we find in history. So here we are again, 385 years before Common Era. We now have male, female, neither from Mesopotamia, and third sex. Star Wars fans, if there's any Star Wars fans, I just like to put this in here to make sure we're all still enjoying ourselves. According to the Wikipedia, which is, obviously the Chewbacca Wikipedia version, the Star Wars universe is made up of 5 genders. So there we go. So back in our universe, for one Common Era, we have male and female. So somehow we dropped off the neither and the third sex. But what about a little bit later? Well, sometime around the 50s and the 60s, we started to have a couple of new terms creep in. We have the third sex. We have intersex, which is the current and appropriate term that used to be people were referred to as hermaphrodites. And intersex is a fairly complicated concept, and it covers quite a lot of the population, actually, when you dive into the numbers. And it's defined as somebody who has any combination of reproductive organs traditionally seen as male or female. It's not that they have both or they have neither. It could be any combination, and it's actually quite detailed, a description. And then we have transgender coming up as a concept. Now, this is an interesting fact. Intersex people are between 1% and 2% of the US population, and depending on which source you look at. So that's a pretty high number. When I was doing this research originally, I thought, oh, that's really uncommon. But 1 to 2% is not that much lower than people who identify as trans. And I covered the broad condition. All right, so later still. So we're getting into the 80s and the 90s. We start having male, female, third sex, intersex, transgender, like we've already covered. Now we have a new concept of declining to state. In other words, your male or female boxes don't fit me, so can I have this sort of option that just says decline to state? I don't want to share. Now we have, we've added in terms like non-binary, which simply means, you know, there may be two and I'm neither of those two, so I'm not part of the binary. We have gender non-conforming, which is what most people would, I think, identify me as in this space. And that simply means that we have expectations around male and female gender in our society. They're slightly different in each society. And I don't conform to what those expectations are. It's that simple. I don't have feminine hair, and I'm not, you know, generally aspiring to wear feminine clothing. And, you know, this isn't as regulated as I can't climb trees, but gender, the way I present to the world is not the same as the way the world, as what my cisgender status would dictate. We have also terms like gender fluid and trans fluid. And I'm not going to explain each of these. The point is you don't need to understand each of them when they come up to you. And I'm going to explain to you how you can handle this when a friend of yours comes up to you and says, my daughter or my granddaughter or my friend has just told me that they are gender fluid. Basically, the terms mean what it seems like they mean. Gender fluid means that you may present sometimes to the world as the gender that you are assigned at birth, and sometimes as a different gender. So it changes for you. And this is a really difficult concept, even for people in the LGBTQ community to identify with. So if you're sitting there struggling a bit with that, that is okay. And then we have trans fluid. Again, like I said, we're not going to cover each one. Transgender and non-binary people are between 1 and 3% of the population, depending on the source. So an organization called GLAAD, which is the pardon me, Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, says that it's 3% across all age groups. The Williams Institute in LA, which is a fantastic educational university resource, says that it's 0.6% of adults. And the numbers drastically change based on age. As you can imagine, the more there is an understanding, the more there is an expectation in our society that people may be different, the more comfortable people are in defining themselves as trans. So in the younger generations, we have increasing numbers of people who don't identify as male or female. In fact, there was a study not that long ago where 25% of the people between the age of 18 and 26 identified as something other than male or female. 25%. I mean, that's a really high number. Whether the numbers are exactly right, whether it was in California or Iowa, right, the numbers will be different. But the thing that I take from that is that my children are already dealing with a very different landscape than we are. It's important to know that most people who identify as trans do not ever undergo surgery. There are sometimes people who want to regulate whether you get to be trans if you've had surgery, and we typically refer to that as top or bottom surgery. And those mean exactly what you might think they mean: medically removing your breast or medically altering your reproductive, regions, external regions. The reason that people don't undergo surgery is it's pretty complicated, right? First of all, it's scary. Second of all, it's frequently not covered under insurance to have gender alignment surgery, which is what we like to, that's the politically appropriate way to refer to that. And there is a huge, huge emotional cost, job loss, et cetera, for being out for extended periods of time. So what I would like you to take away from this is you may have someone who identifies as trans who has not had any surgery. And also, it's never appropriate to ask someone if they have, right? Well, do you have a penis? Do you still have breasts? Right? These are not questions you would normally ask a friend. So you should not be asking somebody who tells you they're trans. All right, so back to the present. I'm not going to read all these, obviously, I don't want to bore you. But in addition to the trans fluid, where we ended off, We now have a whole new flock of terms: genderqueer, agender, meaning I'm not a gender. So a lot of these things mean the same thing, but they're different words. And the issue here is that as people are coming of age, they are deciding what word feels good to them. And many of the words are brand new, right? The concepts aren't new, but the words are new. We also have bigender. We have butch, which is how I identify as a butch lesbian, meaning I'm more masculine presenting. We have femme, which means exactly what you'd think it would mean, somebody who identifies as very feminine. We have feminine of center. So that would be if somebody felt like they were, this would come up in a lesbian who feels that she is feminine of center. It's another identity. Or masculine of center. So plenty of people, pardon me, plenty of people feel that they are somewhere between the spectrum of butch and trans, right? So they identify with themselves, but they present to the world differently. So that's sort of a kind of a sliding scale. Sometimes you'll hear people say that people who are masculine of center or butch, as in people who identify as women, who have claimed those identities, are on their way to becoming trans. And that's not true. It's similar to when you may have heard people say that people who are bisexual are just on their way to becoming gay. And that just dismisses their identities. Gender neutral is another term. We have two-spirit, a Native American term, and queer, of course. And many people, I don't like the word queer, probably because I'm in my 50s. Many people who are much younger love that word, and they use that to identify. They say that it's an umbrella term and identifies everyone. But it's important that even with a term like that, it can make people like me feel invisible. So it's very important not to use an umbrella term unless somebody's told you to use it for them. Okay, again, there's no one authority on gender, and that's okay. Okay, so if you want to be educated on gender, you really want to be embracing this, you want to be ready for when someone tells you, hey, I'm gender fluid, or, I'm in my 60s and I just realized that I am trans, whatever it is that someone's sharing with you. It's important for you to understand that gender is more complicated than simply male and female, right? That's what we've been talking about. You want to prepare for discussions with whether it's employees, whether it's colleagues, whether it's family members or friends who feel that, I see this one is probably not quite appropriate for our talk today, apologies, who feel that they have been in some way slighted, they're feeling hurt. You want to be ready to talk with them. You don't need to know a complete list of genders to be ready for that. Like, in other words, you do not need to memorize that slide from a couple of times ago and say, oh my gosh, I know Tristan mentioned there was like 30 different, names. In fact, the last time I checked, there were something like 80 different terms for gender that were available to be utilized. And many of them are the same version of something that we've already talked about. But when you are talking with someone, if they tell you that the term that they favor, just use their term. Someone could come to you and say, hey, Jane, I'm aquagender. And you say, what? Inside, right? What the heck is an aquagender? But it doesn't really matter. Oh, aquagender. What is that experience like for you? It's sort of the first thing to say. And what does that mean to you? And have that person tell. Now, that's not a real thing. I'm making that one up for you so you can kind of understand how that may come across to you when someone says something like gender neutral. What does that even mean? So the first question to ask is, how is that experience for you? What does that mean to you? Because you may find also that people who use terms that you recognize are using them in a different way. And let me give you an example. So I have a 17-year-old daughter, and we have been arguing recently about the term bisexual. So for me, bisexual, what I understand in my community, in my life, is that means that you are a person who is attracted to men and women. But my daughter is explaining to me that when her friends say that they are bisexual, it means they are attracted to everyone, regardless of gender. So not just men and women, but trans people and non-binary people and androgynous people. And I keep trying to explain to her that when she says that term to anybody who is, I don't know, over the age of 30, we will have the understanding that I have. And she keeps saying, but that's not right. So it's very important to understand that these terms mean something different to different people. And one of the best tips I can give you is that when someone shares something with you about gender, just ask them what that means to them. And, thank them, thank you for sharing that with me. What is that like for you? What do you feel? What does that mean? How can I support you? These are the kinds of things you want to say as a friend or a colleague or a family member. One of the ways that you can communicate your openness to your friends and family is by using gender neutral terms. Now, in a longer presentation, I have a whole list of these terms and something that we can talk about, we can share. But the basic concept is, instead of saying ladies and gentlemen, which is very, very finite, really just two lanes, right? I tend to, if you were to say to me, ladies and gentlemen, I align myself more with a gentleman, even though I've told you I identify as a woman, because the behaviors of a lady, sitting properly, crossing your legs, ankles crossed, hands in your lap, appropriately dressed, polite demeanor, waiting until somebody asks you a question. These terms, and I love that I'm talking to a feminist organization, right? Advancing the status of women and girls in society. I think I can say feminist. That traditional definition of lady doesn't fit me. I don't feel like that. I do, however, feel like a gentleman. I will open the door for you. I will make sure I'd be happy to get you a beverage if you ask me to. I'll call the waiter. These are things I identify with. And so the thing to remember is when you say ladies and gentlemen, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. Please don't feel like I'm policing your language. My 13-year-old son, I love him because he keeps me honest, right? I've got my daughter on the one hand who is super educated and she has friends who are, all of these different terms. And then my son, bless his heart, like, Mom, do I really have to say that? And I say to him, no, you do not have to say that. Whatever it is, you don't have to say friends instead of ladies and gentlemen. You don't have to avoid the term savage, which is really insensitive to Native Americans. You don't have to ask people if they want the word Black or African American or African, right? No, you don't have to. But if you don't, I want you to be aware of how what you are saying is hitting the people that you are talking to. And so the thing that I always want to remind people is this is not about policing. What I'm trying to do in my work is make sure that people feel that they belong. And if I want people to feel they belong around me, one of the most important things is that they feel seen as an older woman, seen as a university professor, seen as a young graduate student, seen as a gardener, seen as a Black person, seen as a lesbian, seen as somebody in a wheelchair, or as all of those things in one person. So it's not about policing. You do not need to change any of your language. But if you want to telegraph that acceptance, one of the things you can do, it's very simple, is instead of saying my husband, you can say my spouse. Now, it doesn't mean you necessarily think of your husband as your spouse, but if you say spouse, what that does is for the person who's listening to you, they hear that you are open. And I promise you that will telegraph acceptance to people. And it's amazing what will happen in that situation. Or you could say, if you're not married or you are married, you might say my partner or my significant other, right? I'm not saying you should deny the fact that you're married and that you identify as a wife and a husband. But if you use language that is more expansive, you will allow room for other people that are talking to you to share with you. By the way, I love the term wife, and I use it for my wife. I'm pointing, you can't see her, she's in the other room. And for myself, I like that term. And I think the reason that I like that term is because I fought for 30 years to have the right to use that term, to marry my wife, my loved one. And so I love it. And I'm claiming that term. All right. So I love this quote, forget the mistake, remember the lesson. If you have a friend come to you or a family member or a colleague who says, I am, my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and they look very, very male to you, or they are transitioning because they've told you they're transgender, it is okay if you make mistakes. I promise you that whoever you're talking to, you will not be the first person who has made a mistake. And if you have the right heart, you own your mistake, you apologize, and you move on. That's really important. It's okay if you've never heard of a term. Use whoever's talking to you, use whatever term they say, whether it's their pronouns or their gender identity. Now, notice that I never said preferred pronouns in my slides. That's what we used to say, but that is just favored because it implies that there is sort of a choice, right? Well, people used to say sexual preference, right? But we don't like that, right? Your sexual preference, if you're listening to me and you identify as a straight person, is not, you didn't prefer to be straight, right? You are, right? So the same thing with pronouns. I am, she, her, and hers. I don't prefer that. That's who I am. Okay, so the overriding principle really is just to remember to breathe. It's okay. You're not being policed. And if you approach it with this heart of making each person feel included and valued around you, then that will be received. Okay, so now we're at the place where I can answer questions depending on your format for your meeting, how you would like to do that. Let me stop sharing my screen. Oh, I just have this one more thing here if anybody wants to write down or take a quick screenshot of my contact information. I'm pretty easy to find. So that's it for my official stuff. Hopefully you have questions I can answer, or I can drop off if you want to talk about it without me around.
No, no, thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Thank you, Peggy.
I have a question.
Charlotte.
How do you determine gender in sports?
Yeah. Yeah. Are you referring to some of the more recent controversies about, for example, the runner who is a woman, a cisgender woman who's incredibly...
Exactly. The whole thing that happens because it's male, female sports. What do you do?
That's Caster Semenya, I believe.
Thank you, Jane. Doesn't she look like she was chiseled from stone? I mean, she's just gorgeous.
It's beautiful, yeah.
It's like, oh, to have that problem. Yeah, no, I think the thing is that it's such a good question. I know it's not World of Warcraft. Is it Charlotte?
Yes.
Charlotte.
Okay,
yeah.
Charlotte. So
my grandson.
Gotcha. It's a great question because our traditional sports setup is male and female, right? It is. And so what we're trying to do is fit an ever blossoming palette of genders into a binary system. And so unfortunately, there's no great answer. But what I do want to say is that it shouldn't be based on level of testosterone and level of estrogen, because there are plenty of athletes over the course of our history, women athletes who have been incredibly successful because they have more testosterone, right? Now, we all have testosterone. I loved when I learned that there's only like I won't say the numbers, but there's a very small difference between men and women when it comes to the hormones, right? And I think I have more testosterone than probably many people do, right? But this really, I'm sort of talking around the question because I have no good answer for you. But I think that the only way to do it is you must allow people to identify themselves. And I think it's very unlikely that Caster, is that right, Jane?
Mm-hmm.
That Caster would want to compete with the women if she didn't identify as a woman. And, you have different athletes over the years, Mark Spitz, who have been crazy genetics. They've won the genetic lottery, right? They have 7-foot arm spans, or they're tiny, and so they're great at gymnastics. And I think you really have to let people police themselves, or you're going to lose a lot of those really gifted athletes, because where does it stop? If you test Caster or you require her to take estrogen, that's ridiculous, right? I mean, can any of you imagine if someone required you to take testosterone or estrogen if that's not your identity? So it's a great question, Charlotte. And I think that as the years evolve, hopefully we'll have better and better answers. But for me, it's very similar to the bathroom situation, right? I get to pick which bathroom I want to go into because I'm an adult, right? Now, I'm a woman, and I need everyone to trust that I'm in the right restroom.
Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean?
Thank
So
you.
does that help, Charlotte? I know that's not a great answer, but
No.
That's
There is no answer right now.
sorry.
Kristen, that brings up
Thank you.
a good question, the bathroom situation. What do you say to people who are just so afraid that if a trans woman comes into the bathroom and people freak out? I have a really good friend who transitioned from Philip to Melissa in his 60s, and now her 60s. It's really hard for me to say her
Sure.
to Philip, who's now Melissa. But anyway, Melissa's had some bad situations now that she's using the ladies' room, but she certainly can't use the men's room.
Right. Right. And I think so I've already shared I identify cisgender, right? I'm a woman, I feel a woman.
Right.
I'm happy with my biological body, although I'd love to be like 100 pounds lighter. But I have this problem in solidarity with my trans friends, because every single day pre-pandemic, when I would go to the restroom in public, at the symphony, at the movies, at the restaurant, wherever it would be, I would get SIR'd or mailed, people would look at me and, to smaller or greater degrees, panic, right? And when it happens with little kids, I'm always okay with it, right? Yeah, not everybody looks like your mom. I'm a woman as well, right? But if it's a person who I feel like should trust the fact that people are generally using the restroom that they're supposed to use, then it hurts my feelings. And so I've developed quite a strategy. My wife goes with me. Can always have I need a guide, a feminine guide, takes me to the restroom. Whenever there's a gender neutral restroom or a family restroom, I always use that. So that's definitely the answer for the future. And I love to share this because I think that the whole bathroom panic is ridiculous. But I do want to share, my wife hates gender neutral restrooms. She's very feminine presenting. For her whole life, going into the ladies' room has felt comfortable. If she was at a bar or at a restaurant, she'd go into the ladies' room with other ladies and feel comfortable, right? Putting on her lipstick or adjusting her hair. And so when she's in a gender neutral environment, she doesn't feel comfortable doing that. And so it's really interesting. I think the best scenario has to be, as buildings are being built going forward, that there's a men's restroom and a women's restroom, and then there's a gender neutral restroom. Because and frequently it's the handicap restroom, the disabled restroom, or the parents, restroom as well. But there hasn't been any instances of trans women attacking cisgender women in a bathroom. And if there was, we would have heard about it, right?
Yeah.
Because we have the whole trans panic. And so I would just encourage you to think, imagine what Melissa's going through. And if you have a friend who looks like me, or a Melissa in your life, maybe if they have to go to the restroom, you can offer to go with them.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, right? And I share the instance about my wife because I feel like that's really helpful for people to know that there's not just one right way to feel about this. And I mean, she's experienced it with me. She knows how bad it is for me. But she still has that. It's not panic. It's not a trans panic, but it's a discomfort because historically for her, that has been a place where she could go and feel safe from the dudes who were, flirting with her or whatever. Does that answer your question, Jane?
Yeah, that's a great answer. And one of my friends is asking me to ask you this question. Please, what exactly is queer? What does that mean?
What exactly is queer? That's a great question. So queer was a slur, right? In the very
when
early
I was
years,
growing up. Yeah.
Yes, like the term fag. And both of them come from proper words with I think a fag is a cigarette in the UK, and it's a piece of wood. It was a piece of wood that would, you could light on fire, so it would become flaming. And queer meant odd, right? Odd or different. And when it started being used as a slur, similar to other racial epithets that you all can think of right now without me saying, it was really hurtful, like the term dyke, which I have been called many times on the street in my life, even here in San Diego. And the community said, okay, I'm going to take that term back, right? Sort of like a nasty woman, right? I want to be that. I love that. Yeah, that's me. I'm a boss, right? These kinds of concepts. And so When you hear the word queer today, it's really meant to be anybody who doesn't identify in the kind of binary, straight perspective. So if somebody says to you, I'm queer, it doesn't mean they're gay.
Right.
I know it's kind of weird, right? Let that sink in. Yeah. So when someone says that to you, ask them, what does that mean to you? Right? I think that's the best question you can always ask. And, because the way they're using it may be different than the way I use it. The way I see it and the way I experience it is very different than the way my daughter experiences it, right? So hopefully that answers the question.
I have a question, Joan Anderson.
Hi, Joan.
Hi. Hey, thank you, Tristan. This has just been so helpful. I think I still need some more explanation on the pronouns. Now, about a year ago, I started noticing when I'd go to the theater in the playbill, and that was the people that were playing the characters, in the parentheses, they would have she, her, they, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So I started noticing that, and I thought, what does that mean? And I thought, well, you've given me a great explanation today, but I still need some more clarification. Are all these characters that are in the plays, are they also, can I use gay? Is that a okay expression or not? A word?
You certainly can use gay, but I think what you're looking for there is their gender something different than what you might perceive? Because remember that the sexuality, right? So who you're attracted to is very different than gender. So I think I know what you're asking me, right? Okay. God, I miss the theater. Oh my gosh.
I do too.
Oh my gosh. We had season tickets and I just keep waiting and waiting and waiting.
Yes.
But I think, Joan, when you see, so for example, if you look at my window right here, it says Tristan Higgins, she, her. Right. And I am not trans. I am not gender fluid or androgynous. I'm a cisgender woman. And I use she, her for two reasons. First of all, it's just practical. People frequently misgender me, and so it's helpful for them, especially when I'm on calls with judges. Because they just don't get it. But the other reason is to make room for my friends, because I have friends or colleagues or people in calls who do not match, right? They are trans, or they are gender nonconforming in some other way. And they want to be able to say, Joan, please, I know I may look like a woman, but I would like you to say he. And so that is why there's the parentheses. Now, this is kind of like the terms. I want to just encourage you to not worry about it. You just use whatever they give you. That's hard, and you're going to make mistakes because we all really understand she, her, hers, they. They is not supposed to be singular, right? We have those rules, and he and him. But when people tell you who they are, just listen and try to use it. But it only refers to their gender. It does not refer to their sexual orientation. So somebody could say he, and they're still straight. Oh. And I can blow your mind a little more, because sometimes you can see new words you've never even heard of, like Z and Zir. I mean, there's lots of them. And it's hard to keep up, and people understand if you make mistakes. And I think all that's necessary is that you try. You try to honor what they ask for. And you say, like Jane said a minute ago, it's hard for me. I've known this person a really long time. And if they suddenly tell you now they want to be referred to as they, that's hard.
One more thing. You said you identify as butch.
Yes.
Now, again, if we're going back many years ago, that was somewhat derogatory also.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit more why you are feeling comfortable with that gender term?
Yes, I can. What a great question. It's a reclaiming, right? So ever since the beginning of the gay rights movement in America, butch women, butch lesbians have been at the forefront, right? We were right next to the Black trans women who were arrested and beaten by the police in the Stonewall riots. And the reason I think that butch for me is a powerful identity is that I cannot hide. You know, I'm never going to pass.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's ever going to run into me and think, oh, there's a nice straight lady. I might be a nice straight lady, but I don't look like that, right? And so I want to claim it. I want to claim it, and I want to own that. And for me, not only am I a butch lesbian, but I'm attracted to femme lesbians. So that's a very small subset. And why do I feel the need to claim it? Because I want to make space for other people. For many years, I've written a blog about being a butch lesbian, and it's called Butch on Tap, if you want to see that. It's very distinct from my professional career. But I have had so many young lesbians reach out to me and say, I really appreciate, you know, seeing your photo, or I really appreciate understanding that I could look like you and still be a lesbian and still be a woman, right? Or that I could appear in the world. And so it's something that I've just embraced, kind of like the term queer, right? That we just reclaimed. But butch lesbians have been claiming that word for, I don't know, 70 years, 60 years. You know, Radcliffe Hall wrote The Well of Loneliness, I don't know how long ago, and I see Melissa smiling. So yeah, it's something that I love.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome, Joan. Those are great questions.
Thank you.
Jane. Jane?
Yes.
Yes. Me? Am I there?
Yeah, Carol?
Oh, I just wanted to go back to bathrooms, because that's where a lot of people get a little confused. And just to bring an experience, when 5 years ago, we set up our grandson at his co-educational dorm on the university campus at Santa Cruz. And we had been there working all day. I said, where do I go to the bathroom, Tyler? He goes, across the hall. I said, well, where's the, he said, no, across the hall. I said, well, there's showers and bathrooms. He said, Grandma, it's just like being at home. We share the same bathroom. We're just, I said, oh, I get it. That was that. They didn't have any further, no, we're conscious, we're careful. We don't go rush in when someone's naked, but we share the same bathroom, just like home. Worked for me.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think that works in every environment, but that's a great example.
Hello, I'd like to just share an experience.
Go ahead.
A tall woman with broad shoulders came to my door from Amnesty International. And we got to talking, and we had a nice conversation, and I referred to her as she. And she said, I want to thank you, because most people do not refer to me as she. And I appreciate that you did. And I didn't have any problem with that. I mean, she was tall, she was broad-shouldered, but she was definitely a she to me.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Geraldine. I think that's really important, and it gets back to seeing people, right? Yeah. Seeing them and allowing for there to be a distinction between what you would normally in your life perceive as being female and what she was presenting as. That's really wonderful.
I have something I'd like to bring up. Hi, Tristan. This is Sherry Ludwig. Hi. And ladies, I know most of you from having been a state director at AAUW for about 6 years or more, and also from having been a member of your organization. But I remember one of the last discussions, because this was a while back, that we had at the state board, and Jane, you could probably clarify this now with details, is that we had to prep for Tech Trek. And Tech Trek was a summer program for young women who were going to study at the colleges or universities in different areas in science and improve their skills and get hands-on experience. But my question to the board at that time was, how will you identify a young woman? How is that going? Because sending, I guess, young woman in all of her myriad manifestations to this program would be of special consideration because of things like bathrooms, dorms, etc. So I don't know specifically if it was ever written down and
It is.
documented. That's why, Jane, I thought you could share with the group, because we think of these things in terms of our everyday life, but what about programs like Tech Track and
Well, there is
our scholarships and our scholarships?
Yeah, there is a national policy on Tech Track, and we have had some trans students that have been have gone to camp, and it's up to the family if they want to tell the other girls. It's just no big deal to the kids that age. It's a big deal to people our age for some reason, but not, it's not a big deal. It's been dealt with. So anyway.
Thank you.
Jane, can I just ask a quick question? Can you talk to us a little bit more about gender neutral language?
I can, but first you have to tell me about your name, Bachelor Lynn.
Oh, sorry, Lynn. I'm Lynn Bachelor. I'm actually not a member of this particular one, but I'm a member of the San Diego AAUW, and I'm also the state secretary for AAUW.
Is that your last name, or is that your status?
No, that's my name.
Okay.
Which caused a lot of trouble for a person my age, when lots of jokes about, your father's a bachelor, blah, blah, blah,
Oh my gosh. Yes, it's a great question.
When you gave the question, you gave the example about ladies and gentlemen, but, and truthfully, it never would have occurred to me. So could you give us some other kind of concrete examples along with what would be, for instance, ladies and gentlemen, what would you say instead, or what are some we could do instead?
Yes, I can. And this is hard, right? Because it's just that memory, that muscle memory of what we say. And when we're taught, if we were in retail, we say sir or ma'am. And so for ladies and gentlemen, what I recommend is it has to feel comfortable to you. But there are things like friends or guests, members. If you are speaking to doctors, you can say doctors. If you're speaking to, a party, you can say guests. Whoever it is that's there, attorneys, judges, there is some other neutral term that applies to everybody there. Some people really like y'all. That I see a lot, or folks. But it has to feel comfortable to you, right? Like if you're from Boston, maybe you don't want to say y'all. This might not feel right. It's really just, and what I would encourage you is to think of something that feels good, so that in the moment you're not trying to think, which should I say? Friends, members, esteemed colleagues, those kinds of words are all very appropriate and very respectful. You have to know your room. Maybe friends is a little too, familiar, but there are those kinds of concepts. Some of the other ones are just saying male or female in your language, right? There's no more choices than that. So you could say gender. A lot of people say girls, right? Well, some of the people that are there might not be girls, or ladies. Like I was explaining before, when people say ladies, it doesn't apply to me. Now, I'm not offended, but it doesn't land the same way that it might land on you. Guys is another one that I love for people to get rid of. Now that's hard. I still say it, and I'm trying to get rid of it, because it gets back to the default being male, right? The default is male. And where does that come from? I like to try to explore that. When I say guys, I don't expect anybody to be offended, because men may not be called girls, but women can be called guys, right? That becomes the sort of default umbrella term. And that is, when you unpack it, not really very feminist. So sir or madam, you say, just, can I help you? Just drop it off. There's a lot of places where those terms can just be dropped off. I have a chart. I don't think I can get to it fast enough to give you more, but there are, if you say husband or wife, you can say spouse or partner. If you say girlfriend or boyfriend, you can say the person I'm dating. You can say, whatever, my honey, my other, whatever it is. But whenever there is language that feels, obviously fireman, right? You want to say firefighter. Postal, postman, postal worker. policeman is police officer, right? Those are all, I mean, you've got those. I see you nodding your head. So it's really just becoming conscious whenever you say something that has a gendered, even if you don't think of it that way, meaning. Does that help, Lynn? I mean, there's more examples, but I'd have to kind of look them up. But yeah, some of the things are things like brother, right? You could say sibling, you know, mother, father, it's parent. Let's see, we have guys. Shall I share? Shall I just share the slide for you all real quick? We have, these are just some things that I've come up with. There's many, many more, but I don't want to overwhelm people. So instead of saying guys, hey guys, or gals, you can try words like folks or friends, people, hey friends, y'all. Ladies and gentlemen, look at all the choices, right? Friends, folks, comrades, guests, colleagues, y'all, humans, allies, people, all assembled, companions, anything that really feels right to you. Men and women, you can simply say everyone, because then that doesn't imply two choices. His or hers can become theirs. Hello ladies is hello y'all or hello everyone. Dude, bro, or brother, don't use phrases like, I would imagine that's not super popular with this group, but don't use phrases like this unless of course you're actually talking to your brother. My son calls me dude and I always stop him. That's not cool, honey. I say boyfriend or girlfriend, you can say partner, significant other. Husband or wife can become spouse, partner, significant other. I love this one, manning the table. People ask me occasionally, will you man the table? And I say no, but I'll staff it for you. Covering the table. Man hours really are staff hours. He or she can become they. Him or her can become them. Himself or herself is themselves. Girls, I would say don't use this unless you're referring to women under the age of 18, because then they're girls, right? We're trying to be respectful of their status as women. Women, friends, and then of course all of the siblings and the brothers, things like that, families. Really, it's just anything that assumes either two genders, because we know, hopefully now you all agree there are more than two, or that assumes maleness, which is what many of these things do.
I definitely want the list.
You want the list? Okay. It's not an exhaustive list for sure. I want to make sure that I'm not speaking out of turn there. There's many other ones, but I can definitely share this one with your group happily. You can also experience it, if I may, just for a moment, by reaching out to me. You can reach me at Tristan@metaclusive.com. So it's Tristan at metaclusive, metaclusive.com. I am happy to talk with anyone about organizations, civic entities, or corporations occasionally in small groups like this. I just love it. So please reach out to me. You can find my information also on the website, which is metaclusive. The best thing about that word is that it's made up. And so you will find me immediately, even without me paying Google anything. Yay.
Yay. Well,
Thank you so much.
This has been delightful.
Really helped me.
Very
I'm
delightful.
so glad. And please send me questions if you have some. I'm super happy to answer them. I really do love this work. The fact that I make a living at it is just wonderful, but I love helping people to understand changes that are happening around them. So thank you for inviting me.